Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and today we are going to be talking about success or failure for all of the Big Ten coaches in the 2024 season. There is one coach whose season is not finished yet. That is Ryan Day with the Ohio State Buckeyes, but I figured we can still look at his season and say whether or not it was a success or a failure. We're going to go through each team alphabetically. We are not going to include anything transfer portal wise. Transfer portal to me is off season. So we're not going to include any of that. We will get into transfer portal stuff as we do more off season content. But for now, the things we're going to look at are the preseason expectations, the regular season record, the bowl results, and then the record versus rivals, and also the recruiting rankings. We will identify whether a coach's season was a success or a failure. Not the team, not the fans, but if it was a success for the coach. So our first team alphabetically, the Big Ten's weird, so the very first team alphabetically is Illinois. Bret Bielema, the coach there, the preseason win total for them was 5.5. They had a 9-3 record, so exceeded those expectations glowingly. Their bowl result was a 21-17 win over South Carolina, and then a record of 2-0 versus their rivals. The recruiting rank coming out of the season is 42nd. Illinois was not expected to do a whole lot this season. There are many people picking them only to win 2 or 3 games in the Big Ten. They come out with a 6-3 record against Big Ten teams, 9-3 overall. Their losses to Oregon, Penn State, and a shocker to Minnesota. We'll talk about them a little bit later on, but this is a team that in Illinois that shocked a lot of people. Head coach Bret Bielema started the season strong, including a competitive game against Penn State, the big win over Nebraska. Remember, they were ranked at the time. Nebraska went through a slump later in the year, but they started the year hot. They were ranked. They got that win. The team's most disappointing moment, though, was that loss to Minnesota, which overshadowed their potential playoff discussions. That's right. I said playoff discussions. Bret Bielema at one point during this season was talking about the opportunity to make it to the playoff. You might think that's crazy, but if we're being honest here, a 10-2 team in the Big Ten deserves playoff recognition, especially a team that plays both the teams who are in the Big Ten title game, that being Oregon and Penn State. If not for that loss to Minnesota, Illinois would have had a discussion point to possibly be in the playoffs this year. The season did end on a high note, though, with an exciting victory over South Carolina. Just an amazing bowl game. I mean, from people thinking that Bret Bielema was taunting Shane Beamer to Shane Beamer just being the whiniest coach in all of college football, showing how whiny the SEC is. It was just a fantastic game to watch if you're a Big Ten fan. If you're an Illinois rival, probably not so much, but if you're somebody that roots on for Illinois and likes Bret Bielema and kind of what that program is becoming and their ascension toward the top of the sport, definitely not the bottom, because that's kind of where people thought they would be, but more closer to the top as they rise. It was a really good season to see. That win contributed to the narrative that the Big Ten is stronger than the SEC this year. So if you ask me, big time success for Bret Bielema. Success, success, success. The next team, the Indiana Hoosiers. Their head coach, Curt Cignetti, preseason win total of 5.5. Regular season record, 11-1. The bowl result was a playoff game loss to Notre Dame 27-17. Did not look as close as the margin of victory made it look, as Indiana did score some garbage time points there. Their record versus their rival, though, 1-0. Beat Purdue pretty big too, and their recruiting rank ending the season is 44th. Head coach Bret Bielema made history in Bloomington, Indiana, the most wins ever by the Indiana Hoosiers in one season. In his very first season as the head coach, Hoosier fans showed renewed belief in the team despite a schedule that wasn't overly challenging. However, this was a coach in Curt Cignetti that was able to rally the fans with this team. It was really good to see. You got him writing notes, writing letters, saying your homework can wait, your studying can wait, get your butts to the game, and he delivered, right? He won every single game, 8-0 8-0 at home this season, and he wanted to make sure that the students and the fans knew that he would deliver. And boy, did he. 8-0 at home, a playoff berth in the very first 12-team playoff for Indiana. A lot of people arguing about him, a lot of people saying, oh, this, that, and the other. It was a fantastic season for Indiana and a fantastic season for Curt Cignetti in his very first year, not just as the Indiana head coach, but in the Power 5, Power 4, I guess it is now, soon to be Power 2. But this team only lost to the two teams that are in the national championship right now, Notre Dame and Ohio State. Obviously, that doesn't prove that you were a great team or anything like that. You still lost those games, but it does prove that in Indiana, if they were going to prove themselves, these were two of the toughest teams in the nation to prove themselves against. Recruiting remains a concern a little bit. Can Curt Cignetti come in and do that? But, I mean, it's 44th. I don't think it's the worst addition, the worst ranking in the world, but I do really like the addition of Byron Baldwin from Baltimore, Maryland. Provides promise, and if he is developed and plays early, could be a signal for other freshmen out there that, hey, you come to Indiana, Curt Cignetti's going to develop you. He's going to get you on the field early, and we could be seeing a much better recruiting class, possibly top 25 for Indiana next season if things go well for Byron Baldwin. Verdict, obvious success. Can't do much better, possibly the biggest success of the season in the Big Ten, coach of the year, all that kind of stuff, just obvious success. All right, those were two high notes. We're going to get into a little bit more difficult stuff here. Iowa Hawkeyes, Kirk Ferentz, preseason win total 7.5. They were 8-4 in the regular season. They did lose to Missouri 27-24, but you also understand that a little bit more. You had Caleb Johnson out of that game. Brendan Sullivan did play, but it obviously he would be a little rusty after not playing so much. But the record against the rival, 3-0. Iowa beat their rival every single time they played them this season, and a recruiting ranking of 41st. Iowa fans this season, they were honestly hoping, not expecting, but hoping for a playoff contention, playoff berth. You saw a defense that brought a ton of players back. You saw Cade McNamara coming back, especially with you saw the emergence of Caleb Johnson at the beginning of the season, being talked about as one of the best running backs in the nation. You were looking at a team in Iowa that has had a solid defense, a very good defense, one of the best defenses in the nation the past few years. And you see them finally get an offense. And so this team had a lot of promise, a lot of returning players. It was a big year, but disappointing performances against UCLA and Michigan State hampered that. Head coach Kirk Ferentz achieved victories over Minnesota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and those are great. Those are rivalry wins. That's what you want. And this team did technically exceed the 7.5 preseason total that they have had for him. Caleb Johnson was impressive. The offensive line was impressive. They were both bright spots. You bring back 3 guys next year. I know this doesn't really pertain to it, but bring back 3 guys next year. That's encouraging for Iowa fans. But the bowl game loss did seem like a little bit of a downer. Like I said, Caleb Johnson wasn't playing. You understand it a little bit more. This one was actually pretty tricky because you didn't get the playoff berth. Recruiting ranking wasn't the greatest, but this is a program in Iowa that develops really well, so you're not really concerned about a recruiting ranking that's outside the top 40. And then also you saw a fitting ending for Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, some of these guys that have been in the program for some time, beating Nebraska the way they did. Overall, I got to give it a success for Kirk Ferentz. Yes, they didn't contend for the playoffs. Yes, they had disappointing losses, but you beat your rivals. You get bragging rights for the next year. You can't get much better than that. So Kirk Ferentz, success. Maryland, Mike Locksley. This one's not going to take very long, I can tell you that. 7.5 preseason win total for them. 4-8 this season. Obviously, no bowl. They lost their only rivalry game. Recruiting ranking was 28th, but Mike Locksley was forced this season to be without Taulia Tagovailoa. He tried to come back. I think he was still in the transfer portal, so even if he came back, I don't think he would have came back to Maryland. But the quarterback position and the wide receiver position, these were fine. I mean, even without Taulia Tagovailoa, it was fine. Billy Edwards, I think, did a good job for most of the season. I think there was a lot of blame put on him at different points of the season, but the problem with Maryland was they were never able to win the line of scrimmage, and hardly any games did they show promise on the line of scrimmage, beating teams, and really you saw what you always see from Maryland. A really good September, then you kind of fall off. You might win some games here and there. Well, it turns out outside of September, they only won one game. So it was not a great season for Mike Locksley at all. Locksley, he now faces some pressure here in 2025. A little bit of a hot seat discussion for him. Just failure, absolute failure. Doesn't get much more failure than this. Actually, there is one more team that gets more failure, and I think you can guess probably who that is. That coach is no longer with their team. All right, let's get to the Michigan Wolverines. Boy, if we thought Iowa was tough to grade, Michigan's pretty tough to grade here too. Let's talk about Sherrone Moore. Preseason win total of 9.5. We always kind of thought that was a little hefty, but he did get the 9.5. Record was 7-5 this season. Bowl result, they got a 19-13 win over Alabama. Many thought they should have been in the playoffs, and they had a record of 2-0 versus their rivals, beating Michigan State by a touchdown, beating Ohio State the way they did. Top 10 recruiting ranking for him this year. I'll tell you guys, this one might be a hot take, but I'm gonna explain why. So Sherrone Moore, he struggled this season as a head coach despite inheriting a team with NFL caliber talent. And I'm not just saying like, oh, they had 4 or 5 guys that can go in the draft this year. No, they had 3 guaranteed first round picks on this team. This was a team with 3 guaranteed, possibly 4 first round picks when you look at Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Colston Loveland, and Will Johnson. Now, Will Johnson did miss a good portion of this season, but you still have 3 first round picks, and you have other players that were going to be drafted off of this team as well. The season began pretty poorly. I mean, 31 points given up to Texas at home. That was not good. You discovered their inconsistent quarterback problems. Moore did improve late in the year as he finally was able to find an identity for this team, but it's rather concerning that Sherrone Moore in preseason practice was never able to identify that he had a real issue at quarterback, and he was never able to go into the portal. We didn't even hear that many rumors about him, going with this quarterback, going with that quarterback. It almost seems like Sherrone Moore just rolled into the season with the quarterbacks that he had and felt like, oh yeah, that's good enough. You don't have an eye for a quarterback if you think that by any stretch of the imagination that you were fine with the quarterbacks you had going into the season. Not just that, but he didn't identify that this would be a team that would need to have the identity of mucking up games, getting into it late in the fourth quarter, and winning it. This was a coach that struggled to make in-game coaching decisions with his timeouts, with the running or passing the ball. I mean, these were pretty basic time management and other decisions that most fans know what to do, but Sherrone Moore was unable to do them at times. Now, I do want to give him credit. He did sign Bryce Underwood, but I'm also not going to give him credit for that because they got so much funding from their NIL. And one of the reasons why they got all that funding from their NIL is because Sherrone Moore rolled out there one of the worst quarterback situations in all of college football, the worst in the Power 4, and probably only rivaled by service academies this season. I mean, it was absolutely awful. It was absolutely putrid. Not only did they think that they must have had something going well with these guys, but they didn't have wide receivers for them. They didn't have pass blocking and protection for them. I mean, for all we know, these quarterbacks might actually be okay, but we never were able to see it this season with the amount of pressure and everything these players were under. So they ended the year with the win over Ohio State. Absolutely huge. That makes the season for Michigan. The win over Alabama, I mean, chef's kiss. Like, if you're a Michigan fan, you're loving that, right? You don't really like that your team finished 8-5, but you ended the season 2 big wins. Bryce Underwood was a huge win, getting him to come there as well. I'm going to actually say this season was a success for Michigan and Michigan fans, but to me, it was a failure for Sherrone Moore. I fail to see a lot of what Sherrone Moore did this season that gave them success. I fail to see what he did this season that gave him success. Maybe I'm missing something. If I am, please put it in the comments section. But this season seems like it was a success for Michigan fans, but this season was a failure for Sherrone Moore. He's going to grow. He's going to get better, but this was not the Sherrone Moore we saw against Ohio State last year. This was not the Sherrone Moore we saw against Penn State last year. This was Sherrone Moore who was trying to be something this team wasn't and who is leading them in such a way that does not make me feel confident for his coaching career in the future. Now, Michigan is a huge brand. Michigan is a program that will attract talent, not only with their brand, but also with their NIL as well. So he should be fine. But overall, we're going to need to see some growth in game decision making, things like that from Sherrone Moore. Next one, Michigan State. Jonathan Smith, preseason win total 5.5, record 5-7, no bowl game, 0-1 versus their rival, and then recruiting ranking of 58th. This one's not as bad as Maryland. You did get to 5 wins when your win total was 5.5 in the preseason, but head coach Jonathan Smith, he did show glimpses of improvement as the season went on. They did have good showings at times against Oregon and Ohio State. The offensive line actually played pretty well in pass protection in both of those games, considering the animals that those two teams have on the defensive line. Despite some positives, the loss to Michigan, underwhelming recruiting, and failure to meet the total expectations defined for the season leads me to believe this season is just a failure. Smith remains a promising hire. I'm not saying that he is a failure overall, but this season itself was a failure to me. You wanted to give the fans some more to cheer about, some more to be excited about. Getting to a bowl game and winning that bowl game would have been a huge success. The win over Iowa was big, but overall, this was a team in Michigan State that I would have liked to see them win at least 6 games, get to a bowl game, and be competitive in that, especially with so much young, promising talent coming back in Aiden Chiles and others as well. Minnesota, PJ Fleck, preseason win total 4.5. Yikes. Record 7-5. Bowl results 24-10 win over Virginia Tech. This is what PJ Fleck does. PJ Fleck wins bowl games. Don't get it twisted. Record versus rivals 1-1, and then recruiting rank only 50th. PJ's Fleck team started rough, but through some hard-fought games throughout the season, they showed a lot of promise. The wins over USC and Illinois showcased their resilience, but the close losses against Michigan and in North Carolina, like those close losses, are going to haunt this team in a number of ways. The Penn State game was another one that was just a heartbreaker at the end of the game. You look at these 3 games, and I think it does show promise for this Minnesota team going forward, and I honestly don't blame PJ Fleck too much for losing these games. The North Carolina game, a lot of people got onto his case about the field goal kicking. Well, you returned the best field goal kicker in the Big Ten after last season, and this was a North Carolina team that, quite frankly, you were stopping them on defense, and you felt like if you made your field goals, you would be able to win this game. And PJ Fleck was right. If they were able to make their field goals, they would have won this game. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do so. PJ Fleck and his guys lose to North Carolina at home to start the season, but they come back after that 48-0 against Rhode Island, 27-0 against Nevada, and then the tough loss to Iowa, the tough loss to Michigan, a absolutely blown, botched call. I can't put anything against PJ Fleck on that. He got these guys to kick the onside kick well, and the officials just plain and simple screwed it up in my mind. I know that there's some screenshots out there of like, you can look at this, you can look at that. When I watched it, it did not look like it was an offsides to me, and so they screwed that up. And then Penn State, James Franklin, he got aggressive at the end of the game, faked it there, faked the punt there on 4th down, and was able to convert, and that's all she wrote for that one when they were able to do that. So tough losses for PJ Fleck, but overall, I mean, he kept this team resilient all season. The win over Illinois, like I said, coming back from losing to North Carolina, Iowa, Michigan, the way they did, for them to come back and beat USC in the manner that they did, giving the strong, the confidence, the resilience. I loved it. I think it was a great coaching job by PJ Fleck this year. I think that he is gonna want a game or two of those moments back, North Carolina, Michigan in particular. But at the end of the day, this was a team that was able to beat USC. This was a team that was able to beat Illinois. And I think PJ Fleck deserves a lot of credit for getting his guys to do that. And don't forget the antidote of confidence. That was huge. So coaching staff deserves a lot of credit, maintaining the morale and performance despite setbacks. Verdict: success for PJ Fleck. Nebraska. Matt Rhule preseason win total was 7.5. Record this season was 6-6. The bowl results 20-15 win over Boston College. They did lose to their rival, and the recruiting rank was 22nd. Thought about it after I said that 1-1 versus rivals. That Colorado game, although it's not a consistent rivalry, we're going to see every season. Everything going into that game, from what I saw on Twitter and everything else, and how much that game meant to the Nebraska fans, I'm going to call that one a rivalry win for Nebraska. So 1-1 this season. The team underperformed their preseason win total, but they showed clear improvement under Matt Rhule. Close games that were losses, obviously. I mean, I don't need to bring those up and reiterate those with Nebraska fans. They know those issues there. But Nebraska, they earned their dominant win over Colorado, and they secured a bowl victory as well. Freshman quarterback Dylan Rhule, he did show promise at times this season. I know there was a lot of people ragging on him, upset with him. I get that, but at the end of the day, you look back on the season and how everything went, and I think you overall feel good about how things went with Dylan Rhule. The team also signed a strong recruiting class, laid in a solid foundation for the future. Top 25 recruiting class is something you love to see for Nebraska and for their future. I know they had under their preseason win total, but I'm going to give Matt Rhule a success this year. Beating Colorado, starting the season the way you did, I think elevated expectations more. Losing 5 of your last 6 games, that's tough, but Dana Holgorsen did show that he was an improvement from Marcus Satterfield. The fact that Matt Rhule was willing to move on from him, that he was able to bring in a guy like Dana Holgorsen. I know some of these things are a little bit kind of under the radar, behind the scenes stuff, but overall, the way I look at this season, it's a success for Matt Rhule. I think if you're a Nebraska fan, yes, there are definitely things that you're upset about, you wish were better, but these are growing pains, right? You're growing, you're getting better. Nobody said that you're just going to be Indiana and go 11-1 right away, and I don't think that should be a goal for anybody. That kind of stuff never happens. That's why it's such a big deal. That's why it was talked about so much this season. It happened for Indiana. That's awesome. Be glad for them. But overall, Nebraska, they're improving. They're getting better. Matt Rhule has made changes to his staff. We'll see what happens with Tony White's stuff, but that's more off-season discussion. I'm not going to discuss that too much. But overall, success for Nebraska and Matt Rhule in my mind. Northwestern, David Braun, 5.5 win total, 4-8 record this season. Obviously, no bowl game, 0-1 versus their rivals, a recruiting ranking of 60th. After a standout season in 2023, Northwestern returned to kind of what we thought Northwestern was. Quarterback Mike Wright struggled, and he was benched early in the season. Jack Lausch came in and did a pretty good job. He had some moments of good, but he also had some moments of bad. The defense showed grit, but overall, the offensive struggles doomed this team this season. No bowl appearance, weak recruiting, rivalry losses made this for a forgettable season in my mind. Northwestern, I do apologize, but failure for David Braun. All right, let's go to the Buckeyes. Ohio State, Ryan Day, head coach there, 10.5 win total. They do not exceed that. They only get 10 wins this season, as they were 10-2 in the regular season. Bowl results, 3 playoff wins versus Tennessee, Oregon, and Texas, all by 2 touchdowns or more. They are now in the national championship game against Notre Dame. That is pending, but still, even without that game being decided yet, I think we can give a verdict on what the season is for Ohio State. They did lose to Michigan, 0-1 versus their rivals this season. If you count Penn State as a rival, 1-1 versus them, but it's not a standard or it's not an established Big Ten rival according to those things. So recruiting rank, though, highest in the Big Ten at 3rd. uh, national championship appearance capped with a remarkable season for the Buckeyes. You had highs, you had lows. I heard some Buckeye fans calling this season the season of dreams before things started. I know my guy Juck on Bucks was talking about that. If you're an Ohio State fan, you want to hear Ohio State content, go check out Juck on Bucks. He is a fantastic guy over there. But this was a season of dreams and nightmares, right? This was a season where you got the dreams of the playoff wins and going to the playoffs and, the amazing moments that came with that. But this was also a season that came with nightmares. The loss to Michigan at home, the flag planting fiasco, everything that happened there. I mean, this season was filled with ups and downs, and it felt like a national championship type season with adversity, things they had to go through. Obviously, the big national championship season many people think of as going 15-0 and all that stuff. And don't get me wrong, that definitely is a national championship season. But this feels like a season that has a story with it. It's not just, oh, we went 15-0, we were able to dominate everybody. There's a story with it. There's improvement. There's heartache. There's dreams. There's failure. But there's ultimately success. And that is what I'm going to give to Ryan Day. The verdict is success with ultimate glory on the line on Monday versus Notre Dame. Even if they don't achieve that ultimate glory, I think that Ryan Day, dispelling the narratives of not being able to win the big game, him finding himself a little bit more without the play calling, him getting his head coaching, what we've heard about him being able to connect with players, all that stuff, I'm going to give this season a success for Ryan Day. All right. After that, we have Oregon, the Oregon Ducks. Dan Lanning, 10.5 preseason win total, 13-0 this season. Bowl record of 41-21. I guess regular season was 12-0. I apologize. Their bowl result was they had a 41-21 loss to Ohio State. They did beat Washington, so a 1-0 record there. Second best recruiting class in the Big Ten, fifth overall. Oregon won the Big Ten title and defeated all three of the Big Ten's powerhouse programs before they got in there. They beat Michigan, they beat Ohio State, and they beat Penn State. The Ducks signed an outstanding recruiting class, solidifying their bright future, and there are players in that recruiting class that will be starting next year as true freshmen with what they're able to do. Now, they did lose some recruits. I think that's more off-season talk because that's kind of more transfer portal-y. At least that's where I'm going to kind of leave it over there. But overall, this season for Oregon, I mean, it has to be a success. It ends with heartache. Another loss in the playoffs, not being able to achieve the national championship, but you're able to win the Big Ten championship. You're able to defeat the three powerhouses of the Big Ten this season. I think overall, Oregon fans need to be happy with what happened this season, happy with Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning was talked about as the best coach in the country at points during this season. The loss to Ohio State obviously is going to, not keep that talk going up as much, but it still was a fantastic season for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. So like I said, success. Team Penn State, Nittany Lions, James Franklin, the coach there, preseason win total of 9.5. They get the record of 11-1. The bowl result, 2 playoff wins over Boise State and SMU. They lost to Notre Dame in the semifinals there in just a heartbreaking way. The interception by Drew Aller at the end of the game. They technically don't have any rivals in the Big Ten, so 0 wins, 0 losses, but Ohio State probably their closest rival, so 0-1 against rivals this season, and then a recruiting rank of 15th. The Nittany Lions made a strong playoff run despite losing their 3 biggest games of the season, those games being Ohio State, Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, and then Notre Dame in the semifinals. James Franklin, I believe he showed growth. I believe he showed improved aggression in tight games. I believe that he showed his play call, him hiring Andy Kotelnicki with his kind of out of the box offense, what he's able to do, the play calling was something that fans were upset with at times in the playoff games, but that I'm not going to knock James Franklin too much for that. I think that's more of an Andy Kotelnicki thing to talk about. But overall, it seems weird. A program with expectations like Penn State, you would think that would be considered a failure, but you made the Big Ten championship game. You almost beat Oregon in that game. It would have been a different story if they'd just been completely blown out, I think, and you're able to make a run in the playoffs. And people are going to say that those games don't mean as much because they're against SMU and Boise State. And while I do think it was probably one of the easier playoff runs that got to the semifinals, if not the easiest. You still got to win the games, right? I mean, I said this with Indiana all season long. I said, yeah, that schedule's crap, but they're winning their games. So I'm going to give them credit for it. Do the same thing for Penn State. So Penn State fans, when you're mad at me giving credit to Indiana for it, just know I'm giving you credit now as well because you guys were able to win a ton of games this season. James Franklin, he was able to win in the playoffs, get a little bit of that big game Franklin stuff off his back. And overall, I'm rooting for Penn State next year. They're bringing back players. It's going to be an interesting season. So verdict, success. Next one, Purdue. I don't even know if we didn't talk about it. Ryan Walters, he got fired. Failure. I don't even talk about it. Doesn't even matter. Rutgers. Greg Schiano, 6.5 preseason win total, record of 7-5. Bowl result, they lost with a comeback win for Kansas State, 44-41. Just a heartbreaker for Rutgers. They were able to win their rivalry game, going 1-0 versus rivals, and the recruiting rank of 31st is impressive for a Rutgers program that's not always been the best at recruiting. It's a tough season for Rutgers and a tough season for Greg Schiano. This is a team that had injuries going into the season, and the injuries just kept piling up, and that's how you saw Rutgers go through a very tough portion of the season, but they were able to rebound by going 3-1 to end the season. Athan Kaliakmanis, people were questioning him at points this season if he was the right guy to bring in. I felt like towards the end of the season, he was showing people, hey, you give me a strong running game and I can be the guy you want me to be, and I think he proved that. So he's coming back next year. We'll see what things are like. They're obviously going to need another good running game, but he's going to improve. He's going to get better. We'll see what that looks like under Kirk Ciarrocca. And they exceeded their preseason win total and made a bowl game. Unfortunately, like I said, the bowl game was a loss, but despite setbacks and everything else, this team showed resilience. Greg Schiano showed resilience. I think it comes down to good coaching when you go on a losing streak like they did in the middle of the season, and then you're able to bounce back in your final 4 games of the season and go 3-1. I think it's fantastic. I love it. They almost beat Illinois. If it wasn't for Pat Bryant, they probably would have beat Illinois in that game. I mean, just an absolutely crazy season for Rutgers, the injuries and everything else. But overall, I think you have to give Greg Schiano a success there. UCLA, Deshaun Foster, preseason win total 5.5. They win 5 of 7 games. Bowl result, no bowl at all, but they did go 0-1 against their rival this season, and their recruiting rank was 45th. This offseason, this offense showed improvement during parts of the season, but it also regressed late as well. You thought with having Bret Bielema there, you were going to have a little bit of a higher-powered offense. Sometimes guys coming in from the NFL don't always do super great to start, and then they kind of do better later on. You saw that with Wink Martindale at Michigan. That was part of the reason why they were able to win. I mean, big part of the reason why they were able to win those games against Ohio State and Alabama late in the season, and the team finished only half a game under their win total, which is commendable with a head coach, first-year head coach that you hired as late as you did. And it was a very tough schedule for UCLA this year. But ultimately, I'm going to give Deshaun Foster a failure because they had poor performances to bookend their season against Hawaii and Fresno State. Both those stand out to me, and I don't know how that you can't use those as an evaluation of Deshaun Foster this season. Yes, they beat Iowa. Yes, they had a very tough schedule. I get all those things, and I want to give UCLA credit for those things. They played LSU in the in the out of conference. Like, I got to give them credit for those things. But overall, I question how much Deshaun Foster really helped this team improve this season. Like I said, the offense looked better at parts of the season later on, but it wasn't able to maintain that way throughout the entire year. You're going up against Fresno State late in the season, and it's a one-score game for pretty much the entire second half. You pull ahead there with 1.5 minutes left, I think it was. It was within 2 minutes. 2 minutes there, and Fresno State gets a garbage time touchdown or garbage time field goal to bring it closer there. But overall, I should have seen more from Fresno State this season, or from UCLA this season, especially against Fresno State and Hawaii. Closer than expected wins against those teams, and just downright terrible play at points this season as well. Got to give them credit. They did do better at times, but I'm going to give a slight failure to Deshaun Foster this season. But if you told me you give him a success, I wouldn't argue with you too much. It's just for me, if I had to pick a side, I'm gonna have to pick slight failure. USC, Lincoln Riley, preseason win total 7.5, record 6-6 this season. They do go 2-0 against the SEC, aided by that bowl result, 35-31 win over Texas A&M, 1-1 versus rivals this season. The loss to Notre Dame was heartbreaking. The way that ended looked like you had a chance there at the end, and then Jedd throwing picks. It was hard to watch. A recruiting rank of 13th this season, and a 7.5 win total was reasonable expectation, but USC failed to reach it. Defensive inconsistencies prevented significant improvements in the offense, underperformed compared to Lincoln Riley's usual standard. I did think the defense was better this season. They definitely were better coached, but ultimately it still takes time to try and install the system. And they did have some injuries as well. They lost Eric Gentry, and when he tried to come back, he just wasn't the same. And so I think Eric Gentry is going to be a huge part for this defense next season. It was just unfortunate he got hurt this year and wasn't able to play the entire season. USC excelled against the SEC opponents they play, but lost close games they needed to win. The Trojans into the offseason searching for solutions after an underwhelming year. You would think because I gave UCLA the failure because of the bookends of the season not looking super well, I would give USC the success because of the bookends of the season looking pretty good against LSU and Texas A&M. But the entire middle of the season was just underwhelming for me. I felt like Lincoln Riley could have done better. I think Lincoln Riley made a huge mistake by benching Miller Moss. I think that Miller Moss was the better option for Lincoln Riley this season, and I think next year you would have had a better option by bringing him back and having experience. But Lincoln Riley, I think, was looking for a scapegoat, and that's what he did. And he brought in Jada instead. Now, Jada does get some experience this season. I think we'll see better from him next year. He flashed. He showed a good arm, escapability, stuff like that you love to see from a Lincoln Riley type of system. But overall, I can't look past that decision to bench Miller Moss. Maybe there's more going on behind the scenes. Maybe if you know something, please fill me in the comment section. But 6-6 for USC. Yeah, you went 2-0 versus the SEC, but 6-6, just not doing it for me for Lincoln Riley at USC. Failure. After that, we have Washington. Washington, led by Jedd Fisch. The preseason win total was 7.5. Record of 6-6 this year. A heartbreaking loss to Louisville, 35-34 in their bowl game. 0-2 against their rivals this season in the 23rd ranked recruiting class. Now, we do give him credit. A 23rd ranked recruiting class by Jedd Fisch in his first season. Love to see that. I think that was a good job. Jedd Fisch and the Huskies underperformed their preseason win total. Losing to Washington State and Louisville were just heartbreakers. The play call at the end of that Washington State game, Washington, they did excel at home, finishing with a perfect 6-0 record at home at Husky Stadium there. However, they were winless on the road in neutral site games, going 0-6 in those environments. I would have probably wrestled with more of a success verdict here, but with how undisciplined this team looked at times this season, I gotta give it a failure. Jedd Fisch, his very first season, there are certain things that a coach can assure look good in his first season, and discipline and lack of penalties is a way to do that. We did not see that from this Washington team this season. They were undisciplined. They had a lot of penalties in a lot of games. And unlike me giving credit to PJ Fleck for the field goal kicking, I'm not going to give credit to Jedd Fisch in that Rutgers game with the field goal kicking. I felt like they should have gone for it in certain situations. I felt like they should have been more aggressive. I think that he was right if he was thinking, I can win this game with field goals. But at a certain point, your guy's not making field goals. You just got to move on and not go out there and kick anymore. Try to set things up better on second and third down. Try to get in better situations on fourth down so that way you can go for it. And that that's what I think Washington, in particular, Jedd Fisch, should have done better this season. Finally, our last one. I'm losing my voice if you can't tell. Wisconsin Badgers, Luke Fickell this season, 6.5 preseason win total, 5-7 record, no bowl. No bowl. The longest bowl streak in college football was broken by Luke Fickell. I think that can give you an indication on what my verdict is for this one. 0-2 versus rivals. Recruiting rank of 25th. That is good. You definitely want to see that. Luke Fickell endured another season of quarterback struggles, failing to solve the offensive issues. In my mind, I would have thought Wisconsin would have gone into the portal and got a better backup, somebody that they could say, "Oh yeah, we're gonna bring you back. We're gonna bring you in this year. You're gonna learn the system. You're gonna learn under Phil Longo, and then when Tyler Van Dyke moves on, you're gonna be the guy." So that way, you do find yourself in a situation where Tyler Van Dyke gets hurt. You have somebody that you believe in there. I don't know what Wisconsin saw, in particular Luke Fickell saw last year. Maybe it was Phil Longo's decision. I don't know, but it's Luke Fickell. You can't let him make that decision. I don't know what they saw in Braden Locke last year to think, yeah, we're fine with him as our backup quarterback. Obviously was not fine. They would have beat Oregon if they would have had a competent quarterback this season. It would have saved the season in a good amount of ways. Instead, Phil Longo gets fired. Luke Fickell is trying to save his job this next season because if he does not have a good season and they don't go to a bowl game again next year, I don't think Luke Fickell keeps his job. I think that Wisconsin has to move on from him after having the longest bowl season or the bowl record, the longest active bowl streak in college football. If they miss a bowl game twice, and it's a hard schedule next season, they miss a bowl game twice, I think fans are going to be pretty unruly. Fans are going to be pretty upset. Overall, defensive excellence was great, but it wasn't enough to salvage their season. You needed to get somebody other than Braden Locke. Just like how I am knocking Sherrone Moore for not getting a better quarterback this season, I am knocking Luke Fickell and Phil Longo, particularly Luke Fickell, for not getting a better backup quarterback, not doing what Oregon did by getting Dante Moore, somebody that you believed in could be the quarterback for the next year. They didn't do that. It's an unfortunate situation. Tyler Van Dyke moves on, and I move on from success and say this season was a failure for Luke Fickell and his Wisconsin Badgers team. There you have it. It's my success and failure ratings for every Big Ten coach in the 2024 season. Wow, that was long. Let me know your thoughts. Are you guys feeling different on any of these? You think, I think that was failure, JR. No, I think that was success, JR. Let me know. Would love to hear all of your thoughts and everything going on. And do you think anybody's coach is on the hot seat? We did a hot seat video a little bit earlier on. Let me know if you think that this season was such a failure for any coaches that you're looking at hot seat time for them. Would love to hear your thoughts there. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. Have a good one.